Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. It's a leap year, which makes this coming Thursday the day that February goes off by one. So, on that day that overflows, have a bit of AppSec fun. Don't treat it as an untyped leap day. Do something like fuzz your code for securing your heap day. Try a version and patch level upkeep day. Or choose a bug class to put to sleep day. You don't have to pick something that can be completed, but it should be something that's worth being repeated. Which means this week we chat with Farshad Abasi about the new secure pipeline verification standard that joins the community of OWASP projects. In the news segment, the sound of fingerprints. The post-quantum, I don't know what a good post-quantum sci-fi voice is, but imagine I did one for the post-quantum level of iMessage. The silent sabotage of AI models. The survey results of Rust users, and more. Take a leap and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
The Security Weekly News is live on Tuesdays and Fridays at 12 o'clock Eastern Time most every week. I try to scan and produce a quick look at some major stories to help you keep up with what's going on in and around the industry in a short format. Myself, Jason Wood, and other guest commentators provide greater insight every week. I'm Doug White, and I hope that you will look for the Security Weekly News in all of your favorite podcast catchers and subscribe for the latest content.
This is episode 274, recorded February 26, 2024. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and flying solo. John and Akira will join us later on in March. But first, one announcement before we talk to Farshad. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSA Conference 2024 full conference pass. RSA Conference will take place May 6th through 9th in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, visit securityweekly.com/RSAC24 and use the code 54USECWeekly. We hope to see you there. Farshad Abasi is the founder and CEO of Forward Security, bringing over 27 years of industry experience to the forefront of cybersecurity innovation. His professional journey includes key technical roles at Intel and Motorola, evolving into senior security positions as the principal security architect for HSBC Global and head of IT security for the Canadian division. Farshad's commitment to the field extends to his role as an instructor at BCIT, where he imparts his wealth of knowledge to the next generation of cybersecurity experts. Hello, Farshad. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Mike. Welcome. It's great to be back.
Welcome back, indeed. you're a friend of the show, and as our listeners are going to find out, you're going to maybe join us as we continue this discussion to the news segment. But as I mentioned in the intro, you've been working on something new and kind of different, and I have to just start this off by saying thank you for doing something OWASP related that's not a top 10 list. But you're doing a secure pipeline verification standard. So maybe tell us a little bit about maybe why do we need a new standard? What is this, Farshad?
Yeah, Mike, that's a really good question. Let's just talk about the landscape in general. Back when I started, application security was not really a domain or practice. I started in this game in the mid to late 90s, building web applications, and just sort of dived right into it. But as you remember, most companies focused on network security. That was the traditional practice when it came to information security. You did network pen testing, you had a firewall in front, and then you just assumed that beyond the firewall, everything was safe in your network. So the focus was traditionally on infrastructure and network security. As the world moved on and applications became more prominent, and our lives today primarily depend on software in some shape or form, and COVID really helped accelerate that digital transformation, if you'd like to call it that. People started using more and more software, and that became a large attack surface. And software wasn't very secure. As I mentioned, in the late 90s, AppSec was not a practice. So, as we moved into the 2000s, companies started to, start application security programs. And that domain started to take off. But it wasn't until the 2010s where most companies started to pay attention to application security. As you were reading my bio, I joined HSBC in 2008. That's when they decided that AppSec was important enough for them to form an application security program. But they were an exception rather than the rule. I remember I was in Vegas for a SANS one of those annual SANS conferences, and I was doing this PCI ISA training. The room had about 100 people in it, and the instructor asked in the beginning, how many people have an AppSec program? Out of the 100, 2 of us put up our hand. It was me from HSBC and one other guy from Citibank, and that was it. It was not really very, very common at that time. But, these days, I think more and more companies are realizing that software security is important. They're, setting up AppSec programs, and we're doing a good job. And I'm not going to say that globally we're doing a great job securing software, but we're doing a lot better than we were previously. So, okay, our networks are secure because that's been a huge focus in the past. Software is becoming better, but what we're leaving out is all those things that build the software. I'm sure you've heard of Jeff Williams, one of the co-founders of OWASP, and one of the main authors of OWASP Top 10 and ASVS, and he coins that term. He calls that the software factory. Software factory being all the people and the technology that build the software. So I was in a discussion with him, and he was saying the software factory is where the weaknesses are, and that's currently where the attackers are focusing. Because networks, they're still attacking them, but we've done a good job guarding them. They're still attacking applications, but we're doing better. But what we've forgotten about or haven't really started looking at is all the software factory, your CI/CD tools, the people that are building them, the source code repositories, and all of that. So in the last couple of years, we're seeing a rise of attacks on the software factory. And of course, that includes the broader software supply chain. And there was that U.S. executive order in 2021, as we all remember, and that was initiated by the fact that there was the big SolarWinds attack and all these other ones that were causing a lot of issues for large companies, governments, and things like that. So that executive order was put out to primarily deal with it, and of course, the NIST guidance came out the following year. But to this date, there are still no standards for development teams to follow to figure out, how do I secure my software factory? What are the things I have to do? I'm sure you're also familiar with ASVS, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned that's where I wanted to chime in a bit. That I joked at the beginning this wasn't a top 10 list because I think listeners know our editorial stance on such things. But that question is, why didn't you do a top 10 list of problems that come out of build? And also, because you mentioned too, like Jeff and his work with ASVS, how does this compare to ASVS?
Okay, so great question. So let's answer your first one. Why didn't we do a top 10? That exists already. So the OWASP top 10 CI security risks, that came out, I think it was like about a year and a half ago or so. Great top 10 list. But as we all know, top 10 lists aren't comprehensive. They're dealing with things at a very high level. And they're very usually, I'd say, attack focused. For example, in the OWASP top 10 CI security risks, which is a great top 10, by the way, if people are not aware, if the listeners are not aware of it, highly encourage them to go and check it out. But it talks about insufficient flow control mechanisms, inadequate identity access management, dependency change abuse, poison pipeline execution, insufficient role-based access.
Lots of problems. In
all
other
those
words,
things,
right?
Exactly. And it doesn't go into how do you address those? What controls do you need to address those, right? And it's the same thing with the old school OWASP top 10 for application security, right? It's a mix of attacks and vulnerabilities and things like that. But the list doesn't itself talk about specific controls. That's why ASVS exists for application security, whereas ASVS takes the top 10 and goes beyond just those attacks, and it looks at what are all the different things you got to test and verify, hence the name verification standard in ASVS. And those verification items can be used as controls by developers, similar to how you do test-driven design, right? I'm sure some of the audience who are software developers are familiar with TDD, which is a practice whereby you define your test cases first, and then you build to satisfy those test cases. So essentially, those test cases become your requirements. So with ASVS, there was the same idea, is that, hey, I'm a software developer. I want to know what security controls I should have in my application. Well, enter ASVS. These are the controls you should build in to your application to make it stronger, and the testing team or the third-party vendor can easily test them, right? So what we're trying to do is that we're trying to do something similar for the pipeline security side of the game, right? Saying, okay, well, what are they when you're doing testing the security of your pipelines? What are all the things you got to test? And then those become controls for developers or for the DevOps team or whoever's in charge of the pipelines to make sure that they've embedded those controls in there to secure their software. Or sorry, the CI/CD pipelines.
Yeah. And before we get into some of those controls, I do want to just touch on a couple 4 examples. But some of my questions, I think, were probably echoed or anticipated by just the process to pitch a new project to OWASP.
Yeah.
So I'm curious too, for especially for listeners who might be thinking about it. Here's a project that could possibly come into that OWASP umbrella community metaphor of choice. Tell us a little bit about what it took to convince OWASP that you've got a good idea, that this actually should get the OWASP logo around it. It should live within their web pages, and it's something worthwhile to put in front of an audience. And part of that question too is, who's that audience as well?
Absolutely, yeah. To start a project, it's not a complicated process. They have an application on their website that if anyone's interested, they can fill out and submit. Obviously, OWASP gets a lot of visibility. Their site gets more than 6 million visitors a year, and they have a lot of credibility. They're well known in the AppSec community, and they have a lot of resources. So they have funding and project submits for people that are qualified, and of course, they have their community. There's the local and global conferences and all the various projects. What they want, if you want to start a project, who can start it is the first question, right? Anyone is welcome, but primarily application developers, software architects, information security authors, and those who'd like to support a worldwide professional community to if they have an idea. And they provide some guidance on their website that says, how to, form your project. They have a submission form. They request a certain type of information. They require you to talk about what are the key aspects of your project, giving them an overview of your project, and then describing it. And you have to spend a bit of time making sure that you have defined objectives. There's got to be a goal. And then you have to provide a well-detailed description, but also they want you to provide a fairly detailed roadmap so that you're not just submitting an application with a very high-level idea. They want people to really think it through and include all the details and what they're planning on delivering, and what that roadmap looks like in terms of phases and any supporting material. If you complete that submission and put all the detail in, then they consider it. And ideally, you would do your research. And as I mentioned earlier, on the OWASP project website, they do provide a wayfinder. Their wayfinder is a map that shows where your project might fit. What are some of the key projects that are there already? And then you can see that where you would fit in within that, and is there an existing project or not? And that's really it. So you just got to find out where you belong within that overall OWASP wayfinder and the different categories that they have, whether there's already a similar project, and then really fleshing it out, and then whether there's a need for that or not. Once you do all of that stuff, you submit it. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks. I think we submitted ours
Pretty quick.
At late December, and we got accepted sometime late January. So, it's not a huge wait. It's about a few weeks, but then they'll send you a notification. They assign you a GitHub for your project where yourself and contributors can leverage that space and put all the content there. That's how we submitted ours, and it got accepted, and we're very excited about it.
Well, definitely congratulations on that. And it sounds like a lot of that work was honestly probably just helpful for you to plan through. What are your goals? What milestones do you have to produce these controls or this fleshed out artifact? But once again, I'm going to keep everybody in suspense before we talk about some controls. There's a nuance there that you did mention, and about the audience, like who's this for? Because you did describe, the reach of OWASP is large. It's great. It's a lot of AppSec professionals, and you gave that background of what the 90s, the 2000s, 2010s looked like from an AppSec practitioner's perspective. But I'm hoping that it's developers that actually need to be involved here, right? And that's who we need to talk to, because they're the ones building software. So how did you approach that, or how are you thinking of that in terms of the audience of AppSec versus developers?
Interesting question. I'm not sure, Mike, if I fully understood the question, but I'm going to take a stab at it. I'll give you something, my opinion first. So, on their website for the project submission, it says who should start a project. They first list application developers and software architects, and then they list information security folks and all that. In reality, I find that a lot of times it isn't the developers and software architects that are involved with OWASP projects. A lot of the OWASP projects are driven by security professionals. I'm one of the co-leaders of the OWASP Vancouver chapter, and one of our challenges is getting more software people to attend these. And I'm not sure if your experience is the same, but when I go to most of these security conferences, I find that the majority of attendees are security folks. In the OWASP events, we're getting less of the software developers and architects attending. That's something we're trying to change within the Vancouver community. We're trying to reach out to organizations, software companies that are building software, and making them aware, hey, tell your software developers that OWASP exists. Encourage them to come to these community meetups, because right now we're getting more security folks attending them rather than software developers. An ideal mix would be 50-50, or a good portion where there's representation from both sides of the world. But that's one of the challenges, at least that I've observed in the Vancouver, the Pacific Northwest communities, that it's more the security professionals contributing to that community rather than software developers, who are often not even aware that OWASP exists. If they are aware, they may only know of OWASP Top 10. A lot of folks may or may not have heard. When you ask them, are you familiar with OWASP? They're like, maybe. Oh yeah, we've heard of OWASP Top 10, and that's the extent of it. Majority of them have not heard of ASVS. They don't know about a lot of the other things, particularly the meetups that are happening. So one of our goals is to increase that awareness and change that. But I'm not sure if that answered your question, so feel free to rephrase it.
I think it does. Yeah, because part of what I was getting at is, let's say we just have a project, or we're talking about the secure pipeline verification standard as a project. How do you make sure that somebody looks at it and they don't say, wow, did a security person write this? Because this isn't how development is done, or this is so onerous. Why would I bother doing this? Versus, oh, a security person perhaps wrote this, but oh, wow, it looks like how software is developed, or this works for developers. That's kind of what I'm trying to tease out there. And maybe this is where you can pull in some of those controls to show us how you're approaching that.
Yeah, actually, so okay, I understood the question now. I think part of that responsibility lies on the project owners like myself. Mm-hmm. So this particular project was started by myself and Cameron Walters. We met at LastCon, of course, an OWASP conference in Austin, which is one of my favorites at the end of October each year that I've spoken at, and I try to attend as often as I can. But the two of us have been ex-software developers. So we understand the challenges as an ex-software engineer, but we're now currently both practicing AppSec. So we started this project. But I think the responsibility falls on us to reach out to community and involve software developers and architects to be a part of this project, right? The two of us can't do this alone. So that's one thing we're planning on doing, is getting others involved to be directly a contributor to the project, conduct peer reviews and contribute so that it's a balanced view. I mean, of course, the two of us have been AppSec practitioners for the last little while, although we're still helping the software teams, but our experience, we're no longer a direct, developer, as you will, right? So It's our responsibility to engage folks that are, practitioners of software engineering and software development so that they can bring that perspective to the project.
So this is probably a good chance to give us a for example. What are some of the or a control that you're looking at or thinking of that would just help us give an idea of what the secure pipeline is looking like, and what practitioners can expect from it?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, the inspiration was to create a standard that has controls and test cases with focus around secure pipelines, right? And we took the name Secure Pipeline Verification Standard to align it with ASVS and other things. I believe OWASP used to have mobile ASVS as well, which I think the name has changed. But we wanted to indicate that this is a similar standard with the same intent as ASVS, where it's supposed to be a verification standard with a comprehensive set of controls. Now, a lot of people ask, well, why didn't you just add that to ASVS? Actually, one of my colleagues, he's a key contributor to ASVS, and that discussion did come up within the ASVS group. And the answer was that ASVS is supposed to focus on controls that help make your software itself stronger. It doesn't want to dabble into things that are related to building that software. So, they're in fact there are a few controls in that vein within the category 1 of ASVS. Category 1 is sort of architecture and risk and things like that in ASVS. But I think the plan is to, even maybe reduce those controls in ASVS and take anything that is related to pipeline verification standard out. And then, we would be putting them into this particular standard, which is 100% focused on, pipeline security, if you will. Go ahead.
I was going to say perhaps like a distinction is the difference between the security of the factory, how the code is being built, versus the security of the design of what is being built, which is what ASVS perhaps is more emphasizing.
Exactly. And one could argue that why don't you just have one big standard? I think I've even brought that up with some of the folks in those projects. One of the things I was saying is like, why do we have mobile ASVS versus regular ASVS and now pipeline pipeline PVS? And you could just have them in one big document. But I think the argument is that those are deep enough areas of focus that they warrant having their own separate standards, if you will. So, our this SPVS, if you'd like to call it, the verification framework, is what we're going to do center around security focused requirements that are there to safeguard software pipelines from inception to deployment. So our framework is crafted to provide the critical, actionable insights and guidance for those, in order to people to be able to defend against all those threats that are emerging in this field and rising more and more every day. And what we're going to do is adopt a multi-tiered approach, similar to ASVS, where you have different levels of sort of assurance, saying, hey, if your application is at level 1 of assurance, then you need these set of controls. Conversely, if you're at level 2, then you expand it to a different set, and level 3 would give you the full set of controls. And why you want to do that is recognizing that no two systems are the same. Some systems, carry a higher risk than others, so you don't necessarily need to build every, comply to every particular control. You might want to adopt a subset of it that is more relevant or applicable to your situation. So that's what we're planning on doing, is making it a multi-level control framework so that people can pick and choose what they want based on the maturity of their current processes and where they want to be in terms of a maturity target. And we're also planning on having a fairly progressive implementation pathway. So having clearly defined step-by-step pathway that's going to guide the users from fundamental levels of pipeline security to more mature and sophisticated security implementations. And by doing that, we're going to make sure that this is a practical and scalable approach for improving the pipelines over time, rather than saying, hey, here's 200 things you got to do, which could be overwhelming, which is one of the things I have to give credit to the ASVS folks for having done that, making it scalable, practical, and usable by folks at all levels of maturity. And then we're also going to have customizable and adoptable controls, because we recognize that these types of frameworks are more templates, and you need to be able to customize them and fit them within your environment. So our guide is going to provide flexible controls that teams can tailor to diverse software development environments. And this makes sure that the relevance and applicability of the guidance across different operational models and methodologies that are used in code and software management. And two other things I'll talk about before we go into a couple of the controls. And we're going to also have comprehensive coverage. So we'll make sure that we'll encompass a range of topics, including secure code management, artifact integrity, automation of security tasks within CI/CD pipelines, compliance monitoring, and even things like incident response strategies that are related to the security of pipelines. And the other final thing that's worth noting is that we're going to have actionable and dynamic resources. So the primary goal of this is to provide something that's dynamic and that's actionable, that not only assesses, but also significantly can improve the security posture of the quote unquote software factory in organizations of all sizes and complexities.
And one of the aspects of that I'm going to predict is there can always be pushback or concerns, let me say that, of this slows down the build process, or this is interfering, or this is something that is quite decoupled from a normal build practices where someone needs to go and run a scanner or review a whole triage results and findings. And I'm bringing these up because I would worry that this is sort of reinventing a lot of things that haven't worked in the past. Why there was a lot of stumbles in the early 2010s of AppSec programs not being effective or not getting a good rap. And you clearly have the background and have seen things go wrong, and I think have the insights to make them go well. So tell us a little bit about how, kind of what you were already describing, some of those controls, how you're also considering that developer audience for them to be following, executing on those controls.
You bring up a good point, Mike. Yeah, because I've been in the sort of securing software development life cycles game long enough to have seen all the various problems that come up.
Yeah.
I think you've hit it on the head on a few of them, right? With respect to, hey, you install some automation tools that slows you down. You still got to go triage the issues. So let's tackle that one first. A lot of changes have happened in the last 10 or 15 years. Tools have gotten better. There are new categories of tools like ASOC and ASPM and threat modeling platforms that didn't really exist at the time, and they've emerged to assist with some of these challenges. So, processes and practices have improved. New categories of tools have come out to address that. New ways of integrating tools have come about. So if we're talking about, we're tackling right now that the challenge around the tooling, the world has changed. So, some of the practices, some of the things that we talk to our clients are when you're installing automation tools, you got to be cognizant of what type of tool you're installing, where and how it's configured. So let's talk about CI versus CD. I'm a developer, and I've been told I got to put some security tools. What do I do? Should I put my, DAST in my CD tool and have it be a blocker? Should I put my SAST and SCA in my CI? Where do I put these things to make them effective, and how do I do that? Well, usually you have your CI side of things where the build happens, right? And that's often the main place you got to put your static analysis tools. Now, ideally, you would put them as left, if you'd like to use that term, as left as in your IDE, so that as the developer is working on code, they see the problems that they're introducing right there and then, and they can address it very quickly. And then as your main safeguard, you're incorporated in as a blocker in your pull request. But the first question that comes up is, hey, I'm a developer and I want to go fast. I want to do a pull request and I don't want to wait for some tools to run. The good news is that the static analysis tools can be fairly quick. Majority of them will run and finish in a matter of a few minutes. It's not a few hours. But we've also talked to developers that even the few minutes is not really comfortable for them. They want like a few seconds. And there are ways to configure those tools. For example, rather than have your static analysis tool, scan the entire repo when you do that pull request, you can have it configured so that it's only scanning the portion of the code that the developer is checking or merging. In that case, the particular developer, is not checking in massive amounts of code. And if there are vulnerabilities found, they can be attributed right back to them, and that scan can be a lot quicker. And the other thing that companies should do, and a lot of them don't, and this is one of the reasons that's when they install security automations, they fail. And I've seen that happen in many, many places, lots of our clients, as well as when we were at the bank. The problem is that companies go and buy these tools, but they don't spend the time to do that initial baseline. So let's say they had a project that's already been in development for a year or 2 years, and there are a lot of vulnerabilities. When they go and buy that tool and they put it in the pipeline, that tool is going to report all those existing vulnerabilities every time the developer checks something in. And of course, that's going to be overwhelming. Developers are like, hey, I didn't introduce these vulnerabilities. Why do I have to deal with them? The right way to do it is before you operationalize those tools and put them in the pipeline as a blocker, you should spend a bit of time and baseline your application. And what I mean by that is that run it without putting it in CI/CD, triage all of the issues, and just it'll take you maybe half a week.
A while.
I've done it with clients, but that can be part of your initial setup. Once you've done that cleanup, either some of those were false positives, some of them were real, and you opened a ticket to fix them, or you fixed them on the spot. Once you've done that baseline, you're at 0 issues. Now it's fair to put it in your CI/CD and put it as a gate and put it as a blocker. And because, if someone checks something in, there should be no issues. You've already done that baselining. So now you tell your dev team, everything is clean. It's been baselined. We're putting it as a blocker. If you check something in, it's going to scan the portion of the code that you're submitting. And if there are any vulnerabilities, that's on you. But the good news is that oftentimes in a day-to-day, there may not be that many vulnerabilities. So that scan will run really quickly on that smaller portion of the code, not report anything, and you go about your day. If there is an issue, then you go fix it right away. And the other thing that we tell our clients is that sometimes, let's say you've done all of that and the developer chucks something in and it is not a quick fix because, let's be real. Sometimes there's a lot of dependencies on what that you're introducing, and it breaks other things in your code. Well, in those cases, you file a ticket in your issue tracking system. You do assess how long this would take to fix. and then you let the tool go about its way. Many of those tools have a way to ignore an issue for a given amount of time. So then you put a timer, you're saying, hey, this is going to take 2 months to fix. You ignore that issue for 2 months, and then you can carry on and do what you need to do without being blocked. So that's usually the right way to do it. But at the end of the day, there's still maybe some issues and you're not really sure what to do with them. And let's admit that triage can take a certain amount of time, especially if there are a fair number of issues that are reported. That's where those modern platforms that I mentioned, like ASOC or ASPM and threat modeling tools come about, because those platforms can aggregate and correlate the vulnerabilities across different that are being reported, and then identify which of those vulnerabilities are related and which ones you can ignore. That helps you prioritize a lot better and faster, and makes things a lot more efficient.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered a question that I had, because I always react. I was getting a little tingly when you said, any vulnerability is on you. And because one of my questions there is immediately like, are you blocking on any vulnerability? But you started to explain a little bit of the context of maybe this one does take 2 months to address, you suppress it. Here is some correlation with the ASPM, ASOC, those types of additional tools. So I just kind of wanted to maybe highlight that, or let me just ask real quick as we start to wrap up this particular segment. It sounds scary to say you're going to have to, any vuln that comes across is a blocker. Help us understand the definition of any in this case.
Well, I guess what I was trying to say is, let's say we've worked together. The company bought a tool, we worked together, and we did that initial baselining, and now there's nothing. If I run the scan today, there should be no issues, right? And then tomorrow, one of the developers is checking some code. Of course, the pipeline is going to run. We've put the scanners so that it blocks that run. And if one issue is found, well, hey, I'm just checking in some code. That's an issue that can be attributed back to me. So therefore, I should look at it and say, hey, what is the risk of it? Is this high, medium, low, and is this something that I can quickly fix? And usually our recommendation is, before you even do a risk assessment or look at it, just determine if it's a quick fix or not. If it's a quick fix, it doesn't matter whether it's low, medium, or high. You should just fix it, because ideally you don't want any issues in your system. But in reality, some things may be high risk but difficult to fix, and that's where you would put them as a ticket to come and fix later, and you don't forget about it, right? At least it's in your registry somewhere to be addressed in some point in the near future.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we shifting context a little bit on you, Farshad. I'll throw a comment out to anyone out there who'd like to participate in the standard. We have a link to the GitHub repo, and I'm sure you're looking for feedback, participation. So we'll please, listeners, please do come and give Farshad and crew some help there. But where I'm stumbling and trying to get to is, Farshad, at the end of all these interviews, been asking our guests to complete the sentence of superlatives. And for this year, our question is, AppSec is most likely to blank. Well, how would you fill in the blank for that phrase?
AppSec is most likely to change the world.
Excellent. That word, I don't know how we could top that. That seems like a great way to wrap this segment up. But let me say one thing real quick, Farshad. Anything additional that you want to call attention to for the way that people might want to help out on this new standard?
Just if I want to draw attention to the audience to one thing, is that if you're not going to do anything, at least make sure that your pull requests have a manual code review as a gate. That code cover breach that happened in 2021, it was one line of code that they added, right? So if your pull requests have a manual code review as a gate, someone would have seen, hey, here's one line of code that got added. What is this doing? Why did this get added, right? So often when people think of if I have to do a manual code review on a pull request, that sounds overwhelming. You're not reviewing the entire code base. You're just checking that bit of amount of code that was submitted. So those little things can be quite important, and they've led into disastrous situations in many cases. So that's one thing I'd like to leave the audience with.
That's awesome. Start reading those pull requests. Thank you, Farshad. Thank everyone for joining us. We're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week.